Hi, this is William Ramsey. The next hour is part 3 of a 3-hour interview I recorded with attorney Paul Morantz, author of Escape, My Lifelong War Against Cults. You can listen to the entirety of the 3-hour interview at my YouTube channel, William Ramsey Investigates. Enjoy the show.
That was 1984. Synanon filed appeals that went through the appellate court system, but never got anywhere. And finally, the next lawsuit is for how much do they owe? And the judge hears that decision. He's adding up what is the value of the squares living there and working for free? What is the value of this? And he's coming up with all these calculations and theories to total $55 million. I thought reading it, what the judge was really saying was 1 + 1 equals you don't exist anymore.
Gotcha.
That was sort of the mathematics that
Right.
he was using,
Right.
And so Synanon appealed that and lost. And in 1991, 13 years after the rattlesnake, the doors of Synanon closed.
Wow. That was it. But that wasn't the last time you had heard, or you heard or seen Dieterich, right? Because you met him face to face, correct?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, it's actually in both my books, but it was there was this rancher in Visalia, November of 1977. I remember when it happened because I got involved in June of 77. So when this story trickled down to me, it was really scary. Ron Eitzen was a 50-year-old something sort of redneck type, cowboy living in Visalia, driving a truck, to work and everything. And he had his 3 kids and his wife lived up in the Badger Mountains. He almost gets in a road accident with some Synanon people, and some words are exchanged. And he goes on a fishing trip while Synanon is taking witnesses in the car and driving onto people's farms looking for who this guy is. There were several encounters where guns were pointed at each other. And Dave Gilmore was bragging his mouth around to help us find this guy. We're going to beat him up. And if you ever have anyone bothering us and you want to beat up, let us know. Talk that was going on. And finally, somebody sees Eitzen's wife and recognizes her. And there's a big chase scene. And she makes it back to her place and calls the sheriff. And when Eitzen comes back, he calls and gets Doug Robeson on the phone and says, what's going on? And he said, we have a lot of people in here angry and mad. And I says, I'll call you back. And he calls him back, and it was tape recorded. And in the tape recording, Robeson says that we'll forget it if you apologize. And he says, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to apologize. And he says, well, I warned you. I'm not going to argue with you. That was your warning, And at 12 midnight that night, they came to the ranch, and they held his family at gunpoint. His son, Jeffrey, I think, was 15. His oldest son took away his rifle, and Eitzen finally surrendered his because they had guns pointing at his family. And then they ordered the family back in the house, and then about 4 of them with rifle butts began stomping on Eitzen and said, we're going to kill you. Somebody says, the cops, figuring that his wife had called the sheriff, they said, we probably should get out of here. And he lived. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he actually shared with the Uber punks. It was around the same. Or was not Uber punks, but he shared it with 2 kids who I think they beat up at a fire station in the hospital. So now it's
1981 is when you 80 or 81, sorry.
Yeah, it was 1980. Eitzen contacts a lawyer named Ed Martin in Los Angeles. Says he can't get a lawyer to take his case. and Martin calls me. It was actually Martin's idea.
But
as I recall,
this became kind of a recurring event for you, where if people had problems with cults or some type of experience, they would either through the grapevine or just through research end up calling you. Is that correct?
Probably for me, this was more a situation like you're in a war and you don't leave your buddies behind.
Gotcha.
They had beaten up Edson. They had this man had never gotten justice. It was like a hanging thread.
Right.
It was also necessary for me to say this on. You didn't chase me away.
Gotcha. I guess my point is, Paul, is I was just saying that for other cults too, people would call you for advice or legal services as well. Isn't that true? Not just in
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. In fact, the Center for Healing Therapy had sort of popped up around 1980, and I sort of put someone else on the case just to finish Edson. But the point that I want to tell you is that the statute of limitations back then was 1 year. This happened in November 1977, and now we're in 1980. And so when we served them with the lawsuit, I used to fly up a 6-seater airplane to Australia and take air sickness pills. The one is that what we argued is that the exception to the statute of limitations is if you do something to prevent the person from being able to file the suit. So what we claimed is that Synanon, by doing the new religious posture and all the attacks it did and all its lawsuits and terrorizing Visalia, that every attorney in Visalia was too afraid to take this case. And particularly when they tried to kill me, there wasn't any way a lawyer was going to take his case. So I said, that's why he didn't file within the statute. He'd been trying all along. And now I'm here from Los Angeles to finally see he gets justice. I think, whether or not we were so right on the law, but the judge ruled in our favor, I personally think he was just so happy to see me. That's why someone was going to take him on.
I believe it. And that's what led to your deposition
of
Dietrich.
Yes. So it was in that case in Visalia that I flew up to take his deposition. Now, in the ABC litigation, Dietrich had already blurted out about Edson, saying that, some country bumpkin had, messed with our people on the road, so, he had to be taught a lesson that our roads will be safe. A gun butt on the back of the head in front of his family is a good way of doing that. So I figured this wasn't going to be a difficult case to try anymore. He already opened his mouth. And it was sort of a curiosity thing. I wanted to understand why this happened.
Right.
I really spent most of the time questioning him about his past and his decision making, and to sort of get answers to questions that I wanted.
Right, and that's the guy who ordered the snake attack upon you that almost killed you.
Yes. Yes. As I said in my book, I was dedicated to Dietrich because they had priced a hitman at $10,000, and he said, "Why spend the money? We have the Imperial Marines. We can do it ourselves." And with that decision, he saved my life.
Fascinating. Did you have any lingering after effects from the snake bite? Did that affect your arm or anything?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. So that was your time pretty much with Synanon. That pretty much ended it. Your contact and litigation with Synanon was that final Edson case there from Visalia. Is that correct?
Well, I also had a case, Dan Ross, who was a member who gave a lot of money to them, and they threw him out. And
he wanted his money back?
Yeah, he gave him $25,000 to take care of his mother-in-law, and then they threw him out, and he didn't allow him to see his mother-in-law. And Dietrich was asked by Connie Chung, why would he do that? And he admitted it. He said, well, the media holds us back. He spoke to the media.
Wow.
And so, that, too, was a pretty easy open. So they also threw him out of the game because he wouldn't donate his last money, and they picked him up by the ear, and that game was tape recorded, so we had the tape of that.
Right.
So these were
You
pretty.
thanked Connie Chung in the acknowledgments. Was that just for her reporting, or did you have kind of a personal, did you stay in contact with her?
I felt at the time that we had sort of a personal friendship, and the big reporters were Connie Chung, Nardis Kino, and Dave Mitchell, who were making Synanon their, the thing. Connie went up there and interviewed you, and I would call Connie and I'd say, "Do you know that Chuck Diedrich has a crush on you?" And I would tell her things that they were doing, preparing for her. And of course, I think I kind of liked that I could be at a party somewhere, and I'd say, "Watch this," and I'd, take a phone and dial, CBS, and I'd say, "Newsroom, please," and I said, "Connie Chung, it's Paul Morantz." And next thing, I'd be, putting the phone across the room. Connie's on, the phone saying hello. And, when I came back from the hospital, she came out of the front door of my house.
Oh,
now, I would say that I find a loss in some ways that Connie and I had never spoken again since sort of the Synanon story ended. But that is something that you probably know as a journalist, and that I know as a journalist. You do a story, and you get very close with the people. And you think that they're going to be sort of part of your life forever. But then the story ends. A new story comes. You may move to a new city, whatever. And lawyers do the same thing, too. I go through a case, and I almost adopt my clients as my children. And then one day, they're all gone, and you never see or hear from them again. So it's just the fact of life. But I miss Connie Chung.
So that pretty much ends your kind of Synanon adventure, but you had other contacts with kind of some of these other cult events, particularly Charles Manson, Jim Jones. Can you talk about your connection to the Charles Manson family?
I was, in 1988, I was married, and I purchased a couple of books at the Rose Bowl swap meet on Manson, written by former members, one of them by Tex Watson. And as I came home that night, my wife went to sleep, and I was reading it in bed. I threw it up and hit the ceiling and started shouting. And she said, she wakes up, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I go, he was my friend. He was my friend. I never had known it for all that time. Because we never called him Tex Watson, and Watson was a common name. I just knew him as Charles Watson.
Gotcha.
And we worked side by side when I was 22 years old, a summer job before I went to law school, selling women's hair pieces. And so I'm reading it, and he says, I arrived, in the summer of '68 in Los Angeles, and I got a job at Contessa Creations on La Cienega. I'm like, what? I was there in 1968 at Contessa Creations, and my mind started racing. There was only 4 of us there,
right.
And so it was a pretty startling thing.
But he had stayed in that business. Didn't he start like a hair business from the knowledge that
he tried to start one. I did too. Matter of fact, when I went to USC, I had an uncle who was wholesaling hair pieces. They were very popular, in the '60s, and so I would let word know at the sorority houses and stuff that I could, get stuff,
but
at cheaper prices.
When you met Tex Watson, there was no indication of the future violence. Is that correct?
He was, first of all, he was Charles, not Tex, and he was very straight and wore generally a suit when the rest of us were casual. He was taken to some parties. A lot of the girls would invite us to parties, and because we were basically selling, women, and he would be very quiet.
Interesting.
It was like trying to, wake him up. Hey, you're in Los Angeles now. Have fun.
He hadn't adapted. He was still kind of the Texas guy. And you also have a connection to Jim Jones. You had referenced early that 2 of the people who came to the hospital as journalists ended up at Jonestown. Can you talk about that and also your relationship to Mr. Stone,
Yeah.
Stone, please.
Yeah, Tim Stone is the real story, of Jonestown. And, it's funny, because anniversary, we're seeing, movies and CNN specials and everything. You may want to ask me why there's not ever been a documentary on Synanon. I have a very surprising story to tell you.
Okay.
But the Stone, was a very liberal, 60s type guy that, based upon that liberalism and the counter, the revolution of the 60s, was attracted to Jim Jones, wanting to help the poor and becomes Jim Jones's lawyer. But slowly, as he learns things, he leaves and then tries to warn people. And
But he was
meanwhile,
how did you know him?
well, Tim heard about me, and he called. And in talking to him, it was like Synanon and Jonestown were the reverse sides of a mirror. It was they were the same thing and doing the same things by the same methods. And so we were, in a lot of dialogue about that, and also, started sharing, strategy ideas. And when I was in the hospital with the rattlesnake, Stone left a message that he would fly to L.A. to, help with my office while I was recovering, which was, I thought, pretty nice of him. If I had full use of both my arms, I might have gone to Jonestown. Although I like to think if I had been there, it wouldn't have happened. They were smart enough. See, Stone had a custody order for his child that, just like Synanon, Jones made kids his property. So he couldn't get his kid out. And because he had an order for custody is one of the reasons, and maybe the reason, that Jim Jones went to Guyana, so that if he couldn't enforce the order,
Gotcha.
It wouldn't have a United States, order, and he was unsuccessful to get the Guyana government to do anything. So he came down on the plane with the senator, and but he stayed at the airport smart enough to know that in itself could trigger if Jones knew he was there. But on the other hand, if he had been there, it might not have happened. Just as I think that if I had been there, it might not have happened, because Ryan made some mistakes.
What do you think his mistakes were? What do you think his mistakes were?
Well, one was bringing the media in there at all. Unfortunately, politicians, want the media to, broadcast and publicize what they're doing to push forward their political careers. Interesting, a lot of people don't know, but Ryan was pushing a petition to pardon Patty Hearst at the time. And he probably succeeded in getting that done by his own death. But the media, I would have said, even all the media at the airport, that these guys believe that they're the great man in history. Diedrich went crazy over Time magazine when they did the story on Changing Partners. He expected to be Man of the Year, Time Man of the Year. He had people working to nominate him for a Nobel Prize. The reason he tape recorded, the reason Jim Jones tape recorded, the reason Richard Nixon tape recorded, is that they all wanted to preserve it for history because they were the great men. So once you bring the media in there, you're saying to him, you're going to be unveiled. We're here to, to let the world know. And so that was the first mistake. The second mistake is that when people asked to leave, when they were leaving, is they went to Jones and told him, That was the second mistake. What you would want to do is just tell the people, leave, walk out, just go for a walk somewhere, go in advance. We'll meet you at the airport or something like that. But once you tell them that people are going to leave, and they're going to leave with the media, they know what the stories are going to be from those people.
Right.
And that the jig is up.
Right. And that's what made Jones panic, yeah.
Yeah, that's what made Jones panic. And I knew enough at that time. I mean, the one that I really could have stopped was Waco. I mean, I was pretty angry when Waco happened because up until that point, if anything happened, the media contacted me, government contacted me, and my opinion was always asked. And Waco was the point where I sort of realized I was sort of forgotten. A new generation of media, new sets of politicians. But God, it's like if there was anything I could have ever saved, I could have stopped Waco.
Yeah, it's too bad. I mean, it's almost like the same type of dynamic. People show up, people panic, then it goes wrong.
If you surround just like with Jonestown, once the jig was up, he went down and took everyone with him.
Right.
And that's what Hitler did. That's
right.
what Applegate does later. It's
Koresh,
all throughout history. Yeah. So with Koresh, it was like, hey, you surround them. That's what's going to happen. That's what the SLA did in Los Angeles. They wouldn't come out either. They burned.
That's a good point. And then this poor guy Stone, his son ended up being a victim in Jonestown, correct? And you worked with some of the Jonestown families, right?
Yeah, his son died. Yes, and then afterwards, I represented
a few of the families in the bank. Wasn't there a bankruptcy hearing or something?
There was a bankruptcy proceeding. I represented the father of one of the photographer who was killed at the airport, and I represented relatives of many of the people who died. And
you ran into Melvin Belli. He was a famous San Francisco king of torts.
That was quite an experience because I got to tell you, I've heard legends about this man, and I was actually going to see him in person. And on the first day we were there, he gets up and he says, "I represent people shot, at the airport, and they should get all the money because no one gets money for committing suicide." And he says, "If I can't prove that Jonestown killed these people, I'll surrender my bar card." And he put his bar card on the table. I was, and I was next up,
Right.
So I walked up following, the great Melvin Belli. This is a guy who once convinced a jury that a woman in a bus case that her damages were she became a nymphomaniac with a bus accident.
That's right, I remember.
Yeah.
Well, he used to have a pirate flag he would raise after a big settlement. He would raise it in his offices. He had offices.
He was at that time. I mean, Tom Girardi, I think, has surpassed him. But at that time, he probably made more money than anybody in history in personal injury. So I came up after him and I said, well, as far as the suicides, if I can't convince that Jim Jones didn't brainwash these people into suicide, he can have my bar card. And I put my bar card on the table underneath Melvin Belli's.
Cool.
The interesting thing was that afterwards, I went out, had some drinks with him and stuff and got to talk to him. And I thought, this was just, so great that, I would, get to do this. But I was sort of surprised that he was more interested in meeting me.
Interesting. That's cool.
And I think that I was something so different because most lawyers, it's all about how much money you can make and what your jury verdicts was. And I wasn't someone. Mine was how many people I could put in jail and how many licenses I could revoke. And so I was sort of a different, breed.
Different breed of lawyer, yeah. And that kind of brainwashing theme that you talked about in front of Melvin Belli was a common theme in a lot of your cases was proving coercion or undue influence, correct?
Yeah, and I should say that the big thing was that Dr. Robert J. Lifton wrote this book, The Psychology of Totalism, from studying the prisoner of war in Korea, and I read it. He's a brilliant man, and he's also a writer in a far greater sense of language than I do. A lot of people, he was hard to understand, but I understood it. I understood what he was saying, and that totalism, brainwashing, he explained, presented one of the great dangers to mankind. You know, that he even said it creates holy wars. And, of course, Synanon called their thing the Holy War. And, of course, you know, today we deal with ISIS and everything. And it was, if you read his book and everything, or read my book, you sort of understand it.
Well, you definitely cover
the second book with Ted Patrick's Let Our Children Go, the kidnapper programmer. And that told me the story of what was going on in the United States currently in the 70s. And when I read Patrick's book, while I did not necessarily agree with his methods, I remember just saying, I'm in, you know, I'm in for the long haul.
Well, I mean, your book, Escape, My Lifelong War Against Cults, definitely proves that. You also cover so many other elements of totalism of these groups, such as the Rajneesh, Moonies. You talk about L. Ron Hubbard, and you know some other groups.
You left out Werner Erhard.
And Est, right? That's correct. So
yes.
you definitely covered.
I thought he was the worst and the most dangerous, and had the most long-lasting effects on society.
Why do you say that?
Well, you had the 60s, which was basically, you know, we're going to make the world right, we're going to undo, you know, racism, we're going to give women's rights, gay rights, we're going to end the Vietnam War, you know, it's peace, love, you know, generation. And Earhart comes along with the self-help group that he's a great salesman and promotion, and that uses the sort of what I call a version of the Synanon trip to break people down, attack them like you heard in that tape. You know, you're an asshole, you're this and that, and you're nothing, and be torn apart, and to be, and just like in Synanon, to be kept up very late so that you dissipate. You know, you lose your ego, so to speak, and of course, if you pay $350, you're halfway there before you go in, because you want your money's worth. You don't want to say I didn't get it.
Right.
And while Scientology or Synanon or Rajneesh or Jonestown have a campsite, you know, and people, it's limited in number. Earhart sought to exercise the world, and in all the others, I never really cared about their philosophy, so to speak. It was a question of brainwashing and control. But in Est, its philosophy was anti-golden rule, in my opinion. Take from others and take from them first.
Right.
You know, it was all right to be selfish. It was, you're the controller of your universe, and if you stole from somebody, it was their fault that they let you steal from them. And it was all right to do whatever makes you happy, to get past the mind. There's no right, there's no wrong. And he actually went as far as people that want to right wrongs are just wasting time. Well, I took that kind of personally, you know. And but I saw the world change at that point. You know, S was highly popular, and it was having an effect on, you know, finally by the 70s, or, you know, we changed from hippies to yuppies, and into 80s, greed is good, you know, and to me it all sort of stems back starts with S.
Interesting.
But somewhat was, you know, greed's okay, you know, get what you want, and nothing really matters. Now, it was the perfect thing for Earhart because here's a guy who abandons his wife and 4 kids at the age of 24 and hops on a plane with another woman, changes his name to Warner Earhart, in a stolen car makes his way out west, and only reunites with his original family when he's become so famous, becoming so famous that he knows he's going to be spotted and recognized, that they'll find him. So he has to go back and then say, well, you can all be rich, come out to Los Angeles,
How long did he last for? Is he still in? Didn't he rebrand and become something? S became Landmark Foundation or something, right? Yeah.
Yes, after he split to Europe, after the 60 Minutes show and the allegations were made that he was brainwashing, abused his son and one sister, although I thought it's rather skimpy evidence, accused him of sex with one of her sisters, but
I don't think it's functioning as it once did back then. I mean, it was definitely. I remember.
Well, I think there was a bigger discovery out of the success of Landmark, and that is that, and followed by another guy, Ed Sieg, a guy who broke away from S and involved his own group, and I, of course, ended up suing that one too because he was having sex with all the women. And I alleged that it was a form of psychotherapy, so therefore he can't do that. But when you went from S to Landmark, what is sort of sad is that, and you sort of see it now, even some more apparent, is that you really don't need to brainwash. You don't really need to do that attack therapy that Synanon did, that S did, and the Rajneesh did. It's like just get up there and say nonsense and emotional things, and people will cheer, and there'll be a group attachment. You don't have to do all this stuff. And I think Landmark was sort of one of the first times that you sort of saw that.
Yeah, and I remember you wrote in your book that there's a pool of people looking for that kind of self-actualization. So these guys can just get a different group of people every time with, every generation or different area. Right. So I thought that was an interesting observation.
They all move on. Now, you understand that Earhart, the mayor of Parlier, took the S training and felt that he got it, and he went to Earhart and said that our community north of Fresno is having problems. Could you possibly help? And he agreed to train the entire community for nothing. And Father Lopez was a sort of leader of the underground, not sort of liking it because apparently, to make an example, one of them kicked the Bible. And this was a very, Christian community, farm workers, and they called Margaret Singer, who was an expert on brainwashing cults in San Francisco, and she called me and said, Paul, will you hop a plane to Parlier? And so I went. This was in June, I think around June 78, and it was pretty horrible because to me, it was like I could imagine this is what happened in Nazi Germany. They had graduates spread out in the crowd to clap and cheer at the right moments and try to whip everyone else into clapping and cheering. But the people, if they picked Malibu or Beverly Hills or somebody like that where they're, into the more head trips, they might have been successful. But this was a poor farming community, and
they weren't having it. Yeah.
Yeah, largely they spoke Spanish, and they weren't having it. And as the trainer was realizing that the crowd was getting more and more hostile, he said, do you understand that we have a contract to do the entire Los Angeles Police Department? And when I heard that, I realized, my job is done here. It's time to go back to L.A.
Right. And Gates was the Gates was the head of the LAPD
Yeah,
at the time, right? Yeah.
my old buddy Daryl Gates.
Yeah,
You
he
know,
was
it's
awesome.
funny, but after this was all over, there was a time I was with a date at a restaurant, and they were kicking us out, because they were going to do a comic roast. And I asked somebody, well, who's the subject? And they said Daryl Gates. And I quickly turned to this guy. I said, are you one of the comedians who's going to be roasting you? He said, yeah. And I said, I'll give you one right now. He said, okay. And I said, what does Nero and Police Chief Gates have in common?
What's that?
They both fiddled while their cities burned.
That's right. That's perfect. Well said.
Yeah. I
So,
only wish I could have hung around to see his
see,
face. And,
well,
and I told him when it's all over, tell him that Paul Morantz,
well, didn't you at one point get recognition from one of the city attorneys for your work in the Synanon case? I remember reading that in your book. It was they gave you a standing ovation. What was that at?
Mike, who was the one of the attorneys representing, was retiring.
Oh, that's
And I was invited, and Vandekamp was sort of the MC of it. And, Vandekamp went on to be Attorney General, President of the State Bar, and he ran for governor, but he didn't win. And he said that he started recounting Mike Carroll's career, and that, and he said probably the biggest case was the prosecution sitting on Chuck Dudrick. And he says, and Paul Morantz is here with us today. And at that point, I got a standing ovation. And I really was surprised. I just really was. I remember later the current Attorney General came over to meet me and shake my hand. And then when Mike finally spoke, he said the thing that he'll remember most about the office was the courage of Paul Morantz.
Wow, that's amazing. How many years later after Synanon, the Synanon cases?
It was 2000. It was
okay.
2000.
It was back.
So 9 years after they were gone, it was, I guess, 22 years after the state. In 2013, Santa Monica gave me a plaque.
Cool.
But I never received much from Los Angeles or much of anything. About 4 times the movie was almost made, twice green lighted, but for very, very different reasons.
Well, you were going to say, why hasn't a documentary been made about the, why not?
I've been approached 6, 7 times for documentaries. Of course, now the guy who's making it is actually from England. But here's the thing, 1972, the San Francisco Chronicle does a story on Synanon calling it the racket of the century. Pretty accurate story. The idea of it wasn't any drug rehab, and it was all going into hot tubs and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And Synanon, at that point, actually formed their legal department, and Dan Garrett and Garfield, as a result and a reaction to that. Teacher named toilets. I said the Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner.
Back in the day.
And he called the toilets examiners, and
we used to call the Chronicle the comical.
Yeah, well, they sued William Randolph Hearst, who soon has his own problems with Patty running around with the SLA. Right. But the real problem of the case is that the guy who wrote it had been fired by William Randolph Sr. for fabricating a story inside China that he wrote from Hong Kong bar. And later he had spent time in prison on fraud. And somehow William Randolph Jr. hires him back. And it turns out he's only got one source. And this is really not a good situation for the examiner. To make things worse, the examiner lawyers apparently hire some ex-Synanon people to verbalize Synanon and steal some tapes, and they get caught and prosecuted and found guilty. And so at this point, there's a settlement for $600,000, which Synanon claimed at that time. I think it was 76 when they said it was the highest libel settlement in the United States. It was put in the Guinness Book of Records. I remember that the next year when I came into it, and I called lawyers for examiner, they wouldn't even speak to me.
Interesting.
But they said good luck.
Wow.
That's, they wished me good luck, but they wouldn't even speak to me. When the rattlesnake happened, the examiner wouldn't even print stories.
They were so afraid.
They were so afraid. So they put a wire story on it, and then when Synanon sent them a letter, they wrote a retraction. And now, January of 1978, Synanon purchases $65,000 worth of weapons from Martel Gun Shop in San Francisco. KGO, which is an ABC affiliate, goes on the air to make the announcement. They look for something on the backdrop for the story, and they find a picture of a man holding a rifle. So they put that, the Synanon logo, on top of that, and that's the backdrop. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, Synanon, the drug rehab, has purchased $65,000 weapons from a San Francisco gun shop. The problem is that the man in the photo was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh my gosh! So they used his picture from the JFK assassination. Yeah. Oh jeez.
So Synanon sues, and they buy stock in ABC, and they send members in ABC's shareholder meeting and ask them what protection does their wives have, and names them by name, and a hush went over the room, and the heads of ABC told their lawyers, go get them. Well, Chris Brown, Chris Brown, real name, and Bob Friendland, like Lawler and Hertz, which is two great lawyers, and they worked super hard. They were the ones who came up with the memos. Garfield wrote a letter to Doug Robeson saying these memos on our violent encounters could be used against us. Gather them all up throughout the foundation and bring them to the legal department, and we'll claim attorney-client privilege, and no one will ever get them. And Robeson writes, it's been done. So Synanon thought they cleaned their records. When Synanon wasn't making responses to discovery, the ABC lawyers were collecting sanctions and moving. And finally Synanon said, hey, you can have everything. We have a warehouse that has copies of everything. Here's the key. Go have a ball. And they thought it was clean, but they hired people who went in there, and they microfilmed everything, and then they had people hired at night to watch it, and all of a sudden a memo would come up, and they'd say, take them down in the basement and give them a lesson in manners, Right. Another one would say, prepare to go out and do missions that you might die. It was, so they had everything, and that helped, it was like.
But Synanon had thought they had scrubbed it. They hired somebody, but they didn't do a thorough job.
Yeah, they thought they scrubbed it. Yeah. In fact, that's the old thing. As Dietrich used to say that his problem was he had dope fiend labor, and they only had 4 fingers. They couldn't do anything right. And, he turned out to be,
correct, right? It was correct. Yeah. He thought he was good.
So ABC is sort of the unsung hero at this time. And now Dietrich never once pled guilty. One of the reasons they pled guilty was, they had set up this defense that tape you heard was just make-believe. It was just a game going on, and it wasn't serious. But here we had all these memos saying, new rules fostered and that putting it in action. And so they were opening the door that all this stuff would come in. And so Synanon had offered ABC something like $60,000 to let them drop the lawsuit. I used to say the only guy who had a good lawsuit was Lee Harvey Oswald if he was alive.
Oh, right.
But the trial goes on, and Synanon is delaying and running up the bill. And meanwhile, ABC gets sued by Lloyd's of London, their insurance carrier. And Lloyd's claims that they only had $1 million coverage, which included costs of defense, and the cost of defense has been up to $4 or $5 million. You owe us $3 or $4 million, and they canceled the policy. Synanon was aware of this and filed a second lawsuit over something else, just to say that when you beat us in this one, we're going to run up your fees again.
Right.
And the judge made a finding of fact that Synanon was delaying the case to run up ABC's fees. And then the ABC lawyers told me that they got in all the documents on cross-examination. The jury's rolling their eyes. They're not even going to put on a defense. And because they can see the jury is just, it's over. And, some guy in Synanon would say, oh, our reputation is important. And on cross, they'd hold up a newspaper, Rattler, death, trap. And I said, well, what did that do to your reputation? So it was a big victory. And then lawyers for ABC from New York came out and went into chambers and agreed to pay Synanon $1,250,000, keep it hush-hush, and all lawsuits were dropped, and no one would ever know about it. It got public only because I broke the news, because I was so incensed. At the time, ABC was making a miniseries on me and Synanon. The screenplay had been finished.
Interesting.
It was just ready to go into production. And I knew that was over with, but it was so dehumanizing that for all the people they beat up for me, they'd pay $1.25 million. Well, the reason that they paid it is that to settle the lawsuits between the insurance carrier and ABC and to pick a policy price for a future policy with greater coverage, they had to liquidate the Synanon problem because they didn't know what type of money figure to put on because of its ability to run up fees and costs in the future cases. Mm-hmm. And so a deal was made where Synanon would disappear. It would get $1.25 million, and the lawyers would reduce their attorney fees that they were claiming on the case. And the lawyers were not happy about it. They had to be fired from the case, and a New York firm took it over. And the jury was so upset that they held a barbecue for Bob and Chris and did it annually for 5 years.
Interesting.
And, so now, what does this mean? Okay, since the time of, when did pay TV come in? Was it 90s, late 80s?
It seems right, yeah.
It's hard to remember, but I told you now how the ABC thing, got canceled.
Right.
And then Showtime was going to make a motion picture in 1998. We finished that script. It was greenlighted for 4 years. It kept being delayed. They only filmed in Canada. And then they all went out of the movie-making business. But meanwhile, there's no documentary. There's documentary on every poll. People know about Manson. They know about Jonestown. We've rushed niche. There's been things.
They don't know about Synanon. That's not public at all.
Okay, now here's the reason. I told you this whole story.
Okay.
I only discovered this recently myself. I heard that A&E was going to do a 6-part series on different cults in America, starting with Jonestown. I thought, what a great opportunity. And so I was going to make contact with A&E. And I called up their website, and there it was to the right. A&E, which is the History Channel at that time, it was doing all the documentaries, for probably the first 10 years up by TV, they were probably the only station, the A&E stations, that was doing documentaries. Now we have CNN, now we have Netflix,
right.
and HBO, doesn't now
Amazon, all these other people are getting into the game, yeah.
Yeah, but at this time, it was only A&E for years. And there on the right on the website, it said that A&E is owned by the Hearst Corporation and ABC.
Wow, that's it.
That's it, yeah.
So you've been stalled and pushed back.
Now I know that there was no way. In fact, probably contractually, they probably agreed. Even though Synanon doesn't exist to enforce it. But it's also, I don't think that ABC or the Hearst Corporation would exactly, you can't do the story without really telling you what I just said. So you're going to open your own wounds.
When can we look forward to the documentary that you're featured in? Do you know when that'll be out or the name of it?
I don't know. He did a film, and he's gotten some backing, and he's working on it.
Okay, good. Well, Paul Morantz, I'd like to just kind of wrap this up. Is there any final message or anything you would like to tell the listeners?
Well, if between my two books, Escape, it was written more for the public to educate by telling in quick, easy reading the factual stories. One chapter on Manson, the SLA, Jonestown, Synanon, Scientology. That without lecturing, without saying the commonalities is that you, by just being entertained by these stories, will see the similarities and you'll get it. It's without being sort of lectured to. And it was written to be entertaining. My other book, I've actually gotten the greatest responses from, which is Synanon people who say that it's ironic that the man who fought and brought them down has written the best book on Synanon, From Miracle to Madness. But it's 670 pages, and it starts in 1913. And so it makes you experience Synanon from its early glory days to the end, and you go through changes with it. It isn't for everybody because, I think we're in what we call the Twitter generation. People are used to, things in a paragraph or two.
Right.
But for someone who really wants to understand human behavior, or to see Animal Farm or 1984 really in detail and effect and how it occurred, I think it's a classic book that.
And both of those books can be had at Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And do you have a personal website where people can get copies?
No,
okay.
I don't. But I do have a personal website that gives.
What is that?
It's paulmorantz.com, and there are lots of chapters on Synanon and their early forms are on there, and stories about all my other cases are on there. But they're long, and it's actually better to get the books because it's less reading. It's shorter,
Well, I can testify that Escape My Lifelong War Against the Cult is an excellent book. I read the whole thing, so kudos to you for writing that. And your other book is The True Story of Charles Dieterich and Synanon by Paul Morantz, From Miracle to Madness. So those can be had on Amazon and www.paulmorantz.com. Paul, thank you so much. We talked for a long time. Now we just made 3 hours, so you're my longest interview I've ever done.
Really? Well, the question is how many people will be asleep for 3 hours?
I don't know. My listeners have long attention spans. They're not fully Twitter generationalized. They actually listen to these things. People put them on and drive or listen to them at work. So you never know. You can see.
Well, it was interesting. Thank you very
Paul,
much.
Thank you. God bless. Have a great day.
Hi, this is William Ramsey. The preceding hour was the third hour of a 3-hour interview with attorney Paul Morantz. The entirety of the interview can be found at my YouTube channel, William Ramsey Investigates. You can also find his books on Amazon and at his website, www.paulmorantz.com. PaulMorantz.com. Thank you. Have a great day.